Thank you for watching True Crime Time. Hey everybody, it's great to be back. There's a lot going on in the Kohberger case to talk about. We have Bryan's alibi, the state's response to Bryan's alibi. We have some upcoming court hearings regarding DNA evidence, and there's some new expert witnesses we've heard about that we can talk about in some upcoming videos. For tonight's video though, I wanted to ask everybody a question and hear your answers in the comments below about something that's been bothering me for a while that I've been trying to figure out with the case. So in the affidavit, it describes how Bryan was driving through the neighborhood multiple times in the 30 or 40 minutes leading up to when the murders occurred. There was also the Linda Lane camera footage that was released that lined up pretty well with what the affidavit was talking about and helped paint a pretty good visual of what may have happened that night as the car was driving through. So the thing that stood out to me was on that fourth pass that Bryan had made, he stops and turns around rather than driving through all the way around like he had done the previous 3 times, we assume, based off of the description in the affidavit and the Linda Lane footage. He did something different on that fourth pass coming through. So here we have Bryan, patrolling the neighborhood, and I assume kind of checking things out to see how it looked before he decided he was going to go in there and commit this murder. And then right under his nose, we have the Doordash delivery happening at 4 a.m. Now, the Linda Lane footage does show Bryan going through at 3:57, and then he comes back again, and you see him pass through and make that turnaround at about 4:05. So it is possible that the Doordash driver came in and made that delivery and left without Bryan seeing him. And so that's the question I wanted to ask everybody is, do you think Bryan saw the Doordash delivery driver that night? Or do you think the Doordash happened just in that small window when Bryan left at about probably 3:58 and then returned back into the neighborhood at about 4:04? So according to the affidavit, Bryan's driving into King Road here, and he's going down Queen Road, and he's circling around. And most likely, we assume he was stopping here for a moment, and he was, checking out the house, maybe looking to see if the lights were off. And then he was exiting out and then kind of making a larger loop around the outside of the neighborhood, and then he'd make his way back in and then circle back through. But on that fourth time, instead of circling through, right, he turns around right here. And instead of circling through like he had done before, he stops here, comes back out, and then goes back the way he came in. And then not only that, when he gets here in front of the house, he pauses for a moment as if he's going to park or maybe try to turn around. This is according to the affidavit. And he kind of pauses here, and then instead of turning or parking, he continues down to King Road and he turns around. And then in the Linda Lane footage, you can actually see a final 5th pass. You see a car coming around the building, and we assume that might have been the final drive-through before Bryan went into the house and committed the murders. So it really was bothering me, what was it that caused Bryan to turn around, change his whole pattern? He had been circling, and for whatever reason, in that moment, he said, nope, I'm going to stop here. And it's kind of abrupt too. If you watch the Linda Lane footage at 4:05 when he comes through and he does his turnaround, it almost looks like he's about to circle, and then he kind of slows down and makes like a hard left, and then turns around and goes back the way he came. So it's interesting to me, and so I got to thinking and wondering, well, maybe he saw the Doordash driver in the driveway, and he wanted to get back and be able to have eyes on the house and see when the Doordash driver would be leaving or who it was, be curious, kind of checking it out. So I thought about that scenario, and then I thought about maybe he saw somebody else in the parking lot walking to their car or something like that, and he decided he didn't want to circle around. But the way he comes back through on that final pass, he didn't seem too concerned about any bystanders on that final pass before he goes into the house. So I don't necessarily think he saw somebody in the parking lot. I do think it had something to do with the actual house as to why he turned around. So again, with the Doordash driver, I don't know though if he would have committed the murders if he had seen the Doordash driver. And that's what has me leaning to the idea that he did not see the Doordash driver, because if he had seen the car in the driveway, most likely the lights would have been on. May have even seen somebody standing in the driveway, walking up to the door. He may not have known who it was, but either way, there's activity happening at the house, and somebody inside the house is most likely awake. And I think the whole point of Bryan driving through the neighborhood multiple times was waiting for that moment when everybody was not awake. So it just doesn't make sense to me that Bryan would have seen that activity at the house and still gone through with the murder. And if you look here at the front driveway of the home, you can see how narrow the road really is from the driveway to the other side of the road. So this is where Bryan would have been driving by. So if the Doordash driver was in the driveway, or if anybody was standing in the driveway, it would have been very obvious that there was another car there all of a sudden that wasn't there after his previous 3 times coming by the house. So I don't think Bryan saw the Doordash driver at all. I don't think he was aware of the Doordash delivery. What I think actually happened, and the reason that Bryan turned around, the reason that he did, is I think that he finally saw the lights were off in front of the home. I think that he wanted to stop and come back by the front side of the house to get a good view of the windows one last time before he circled around and went in to commit the crime. And I think when he came through on that 4th pass, he noticed that things were darker, because prior to the Doordash delivery, there could have been lights on. Xana may have been in the living room. There could have been a light on somewhere in the house that he was waiting to be turned off. And when he came through that 4th time, the Doordash food had been there. Maybe Xana wasn't waiting anymore and it was time to settle down and eat and go to bed. She turned off more lights, and Bryan came through, saw those lights were off, but he didn't get quite the view he wanted as he drove by. So when he got up to that parking lot, he decided to turn around, come back down, and take one more look before he went to commit the crime. And then I think what happened is he got a little too far down the road, and he was going to make a left turn and go up the hill here and park where he normally parked, but he had drifted down just a little too far looking at the house. And when he went to kind of turn to go back, he realized it was really narrow, and he said, nope, I'm just going to drive down to the end of King Road, turn around, come back by, and circle around like I always do, and then park up next to the side of the house to go in and commit the crime. So in my opinion, everybody, I think the reason Bryan changed his pattern, turned around where he did, and went back was to get a second look at the house. And I think that was the moment that Bryan was saying to himself that it was time and he was going to go in. Everything looked right, everything was quiet, and he wanted to just get that final confirmation before going through with it. Thanks for watching, everybody. My next video will be coming out very soon. We'll be talking more about what's going on in the case. I'll see you then.